Hello, welcome to Consume Chats. Today I'm joined by Anna Brent, who is the Global Head of Brand and DEI at a creative agency across the pond and also co-director of Community and Culture at Outvertising. Is that right?
That's
Yeah.
right.
Perfect. So Anna and I kind of stumbled across each other because we both are part of BIMA and we're doing some BIMA judging, and I was really interested by Anna's take on DEI, which I am very interested in making sure that we kind of signpost good policy and best practice and things that are done well. A concern for me recently has been things that kind of like when diversity and inclusion is done in a tokenistic way and doesn't really have any thought, and our previous conversations around creating policy and actually having something that makes a difference instead of just doing something to box check. So with that in mind, I will let you introduce yourself, Anna, and a little bit about what you do work-wise, not work-wise, but also for like a hustle and a cause. So over to you.
Cool, thanks. Yes, so I'm Anna. I am the Global Head of Brand and DEI at Across the Pond. We're an independent creative agency. We work for lots of tech and tech-enabled clients. Some of our main clients are Google, YouTube, Meta, DeepMind. I call that my day job. And then my gay job is that I'm on the board of directors at Outvertising. Outvertising is a non-profit that exists to make LGBTQIA plus people feel totally included in the world of advertising and marketing. So we look at both how the industry is structured and what it does, but also what it makes and what it puts out in the world. And we try and make sure that the queer community is really well served. My personal life, I'm married, I have 2 kids, and I live in South London.
Wow, I didn't realise you had 2 kids. How old are your kids?
They're 6 and 8.
Wow.
They're bonkers, so it's a lot of energy.
You're pretty busy then. You have a pretty full life.
Yes, I do. But I guess I sort of like it that way. I don't know how it works. It's busy, but I juggle.
Yeah. Wow. I would have hats off to anybody that's like working and also doing things, trying to like positive disruptor stuff, and also managing kids, which are little disruptors, also positive disruptors. So my questions for you were around, so at Across the Pond, you work on the DEI stuff, and we'd had a little bit of a conversation about that. What kind of brought you to do that? Because that wasn't the role that you started in, but that's something that you took on and have kind of and are developing and progressing.
Yeah, that's right. My background is actually production. So I came into Across the Pond as a producer and an exec producer. And that's what my background is. I loved it. I worked in TV beforehand. So that's really what I knew, how to make stuff and getting stuff out in the world for a brand or a broadcaster. But I definitely got to a point where what and how we were doing was really important to me, which was naturally kind of bleeding into that territory that maybe didn't even have the name DEI at the time. We're fortunate enough Across the Pond to work for clients who I see as being at the forefront of really caring about inclusive marketing. So Google, for example, was really thinking and talking about this early on. And it meant that through their influence, through their questions and suggestions, it made us really want to consider how we're making what we're doing. We're not just making good work. We know we make good work, but are we making it in the best way we can? Working with great people, really putting stuff that's healthy, authentic out there. And how does it feel to work Across the Pond? Those were all questions that were kind of coming into our world, and realizing more and more that this was the territory. It is around diversity and inclusion. That's what it's called. It's being considerate about your workplace and your work. So I started to just be in those conversations through my production work. And it got to a point where I was recognizing that I think it needed somebody to really lead on it, to make it substantial, make it a sort of strategic and deep, and not just sort of bits and pieces. Because I think we were doing bits and pieces were good and fine, but it wasn't enough. So, okay, we'd think about, what's our choice of like how we're representing a person on screen, or what's our choice about who we're hiring, or what we're making with that person. But what was it laddering into? It was like a little bit kind of all over the place. So what I identified and talked about with my bosses, our founder Julie particularly, was the idea that this was moving on from a kind of nice to have that businesses could do, and moving into being business critical if you wanted to do it well and feel really proud and comfortable by saying you were doing it well as a business. So that's where the role of head of DEI came. And for a while I was doing both. I was in production and doing head of DEI. And then, the role has evolved. It's become global. I now have a lead in the US working into me, a lead in APAC working into me. And as a team, it means that we can be just a bit more thorough about doing this on a global level. So it's constantly evolving, it's constantly growing. It's super important to us as an agency.
And how did kind of your management and leadership team take it when you're like, this needs, like, we're doing some things, but I feel like it needs a dedicated role? How was that kind of met?
I think it was essentially really positive. So I work for a female founder, and that's still insanely rare in the industry. Mm-hmm. I mean, the statistic is out there that 1% of creative agencies are founded by women. So I think because we had that, we were probably talking about gender equality. We were talking about gender representation just in our lives and beings. So I think perhaps when something is in you in a personal sense, it's quite easy to translate it into a professional priority. So yeah, the management responded really well to it. They believed in it. They understood the client position on it. We knew that to feel really kind of like good about what we were doing, we needed eyes on it. And that's an investment. It's an investment of their time to take me away from production and really agree to like me looking at DEI as part of my day job. But yeah, we all agree to it. And I don't think there's ever been any regrets. It's really become part of the fabric of who we are.
No, and I think it's such a big thing to take you away from your day job and create a dedicated role. Because, we see so many organisations that are kind of taking that step into trying to do things, but without having a real focus, it's hard to do it well.
Yeah.
Like you say, you kind of see bits done, and through no fault of their own, I guess it kind of looks tokenistic because it's a reaction to a certain like Pride Month, or like the Lunar New Year for me that I'm aware of. And it's like, they dip their toe in, but like we feel like there's not, when you haven't got a dedicated focus on that, and my head marketing roadmap, there's not like a plan, like, okay, what else are we going to do? What's the follow-up?
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think it's a real game step change that there's something that you've got a dedicated person who took you away from your role.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, so for the businesses out there that are trying to do something, something I was keen to kind of get you to speak about is what are some of the key things, some of the key kind of actions. We spoke about policy that businesses could consider, because there's so much that could be done that you can look at. And I think it can be overwhelming for businesses to think like, okay, in terms of diversity, what do we need to do? In terms of being inclusive, what do we need to do? Yeah. So yeah, I kind of wanted to talk to you about what can businesses do? What are some like specific takeaways, instead of them thinking, oh, all right, okay, we have to do this. What can we do to do it right?
Yeah, you're right. There's like a million things you can do. You can shape how you do DEI in so many different ways. And I would say there probably is no right and wrong. And that's part of the acceptance of doing it. Yeah. I think you need to try and find what feels right for your business, your culture, your clients, your network, like, rather than probably just find someone else's strategy and apply it to yours. The right way to do it is to really work on what's right for you. The way we did it was to work collectively in a sort of workshop format that we had facilitated by an external body. And I think that was really good. I think external voices, and I know that can be an investment, but I do think that's a good way to kick off. Like somebody really talking to as many people from the company as possible about what do you think collectively that should be the priority for you guys? Where can you really have an influence? This idea of sphere of influence, it sounds like jargon, but I actually think it's really important to think like, what have we got the capacity to change for the better? Like, where can we make a difference and identify that? And that hopefully will give you a steer for what to prioritize. So the result of us doing this kind of group workshop was that we came out with what we call our 4 pillars, and they're basically 4 priorities. But because they're agreed on by everyone, it feels like you're coming from some basis. You haven't just gone, oh, the most important thing to us is blah. We've actually worked together to go, okay, in our agency, we really want to think about how we make sure we have an inclusive culture for the people that work there. What's it feel like to be at ATP? Does everyone really like feel like they truly belong? That was one thing we wanted to look at. Secondly, we went, okay, we really need good representation. We're making films, we're making print, we're making output, they feature people and communities and culture. Let's really care about that idea, representation. Then we thought, let's really look at our agency makeup. You know, like, how do we make sure that we are as diverse a body of people as we can be, how we use each other's attributes and differences and cultures to make something new and different. And then the 4th thing we decided to look at was to focus on our suppliers. Who do we work with? There's no point us being really good at all this stuff if we employ people whose values are really different and not in keeping. So we identified those 4 areas, and I think I would encourage any business to do the same. Like, there's 100 things you could do, but if you just choose, let's say 3, 4, 5, then I think everything you do can ladder into those 3, 4, 5, and that's where you start to get a sort of structure, a strategy, and you can start to make policies that go into each of those things. So that's where we started, because I think you're totally right. It could be overwhelming and it could be massive, and also I think the tendency is to jump the gun with actions. Like, you want to think, what's the thing we can do? Oh, let's do a Pride activation. Let's celebrate Pride, or let's really look at our hiring policy to make sure we've got some good policies in there. But why? What are those things laddering into? Are you like really collectively agreed on what the point is of those activities? So that's where my advice would start, is to just like sit back from activities. Don't think about what you're doing. Think about the why. And in an ideal world, it's something that would come from a lot of people and not just 1 or 2. So not just the most senior person around.
Yeah, I think I really like that. Is I would agree. Most people are activity led.
Yeah.
When they look at like, what can we do to be inclusive, and they're activity led. And I think if that's the one kind of big takeaway that people get from this, is to think about the why.
Yeah.
And then work on the what you're going to do. You know, I really like the pillars. You know, decide on why you want to do something, and how. But first of all, how does that affect the people in your organisation before you think about what you're broadcasting, what you want to broadcast out to the world. You know, the image you want to present, because image doesn't really stand for much when you haven't got your house in order and the people within it can't advocate and say, yeah, actually, I work for a company like this. So, definitely the why is important.
Yeah. And just to say, attaching to the why, the next thing I think that's important is who. So ultimately, you want to assign some level of accountability to each of those pillars or each of those focuses. So you would always want to feel that everybody in your company is contributing to the activities, but you want somebody who is senior and accountable and responsible for ultimately ensuring that those things happen, because I think you need that. It's all well and good to say we're all in it, we all need to do it, but you need to kind of like really assign that responsibility to make things happen.
Yeah, definitely. And I think also when it gets kind of put on someone to say, oh, okay, you look at inclusion, you do need that buy-in, because things might need to change, or things will need to change, and you need that senior leadership behind you for the whole company to know that this is a priority and to make those changes. That in mind, that leads us nicely on to the next point, which what are the key challenges of kind of delivering DI well?
I mean, I imagine challenges are very different from company to company. There are clearly industries and companies who have the challenge that is perhaps the obvious one. It's the idea of sort of systemic change. Change is really hard when there are ingrained values or practices that don't really align with diversity and inclusion. The challenge there is clear. It's unpicking what's gone before. It's convincing senior stakeholders to care. And I think those challenges are big, shouldn't be underestimated. And I think you should assume that the change will be slow, even though you hope to make it. But then also perhaps there are things that you don't think about, like perhaps you have a really young workforce and quite frankly, they understand some of these principles because it's what they've always grown up with and always thought about and probably consider themselves pretty well versed. And then the challenge sometimes is to almost get them engaged in being told things are policy, or you're asking them to do actions that they might naturally feel they do anyway. So I think challenges vary a lot from company to company. But, you know, I would say you want to think about what is your specific tone and approach. So is there a lack of transparency in your company? Do you need to find ways to unpick that? So I wouldn't say we ever had a problem with lack of transparency, but we've really tried to action ways to make sure there is transparency. So not just thinking about diversity and inclusion, but we have one thing that we call Just Ask. Monthly, there's an anonymous form that goes to the whole agency and anyone can ask anything. So it can be like, can we have better yogurts in the fridge, to I think we all need a pay rise? Like, you know, big or small, it's something that goes from everyone straight to directors. They commit to answering any question that's asked in an open forum. So that is just an idea of transparency. You know, you can go straight to the top and you can ask the question that you potentially wouldn't ask in person. But also for transparency reasons, we do really regular one-to-ones. We have really kind of good structure around what we call buddy chats, water cooler moments. We try and create all these forums for people to speak openly in different ways and with different people. So perhaps, you know, if you feel like you're in a workplace where there isn't like great communication, transparency might be a barrier that you have to tackle. And those are some activities that could do it. Or perhaps it's around the skill set that you feel is in-house. So I think often for small businesses or medium businesses, you don't have large people teams or HR teams. And you might have someone like me heading it up whose background is not necessarily in that territory. So then the challenge is to sort of find the space to self-educate. You know, you really have to put in the legwork. You have to attend webinars. You have to try and find people to talk to and learn from. You have to read a lot. Perhaps you have to find volunteer time to really get experience of being exposed to lived experiences that are different to yours. So challenges can almost be 1 to 100, and it depends on what your business is like. But it's really important to identify them. That's key.
Yeah, that's one of the things I was going to say is about like, where do you have any signposts? Because obviously the knowledge out there and is vast, and I'm constantly finding things in like the area that I'm looking at. So where would you say people, like what kind of resources, what are good places to look to kind of start that research? Like I say, you always have to keep reading, keep learning, and you know what good groups or resources or things people can subscribe to. Insta accounts, people love an Insta account for learning now. I don't follow people, I purely follow learning things on Instagram and TikToks. You know, what signposts can you?
Yeah, some of my favorites are there's an organization called D&I Leaders, and I think they have probably been the most valuable resource to me in terms of really principal important things to do with sort of stepping up your knowledge of this territory. So they do really excellent webinars, seminars. Their newsletter content is really, really high end, and it's really accessible, which is sort of fundamental. It's not a kind of like outrageously expensive. A lot of it is free. So for me, that's really in the value of the learning and sharing you need to do. There's also a course that's run by the IPA, and it's a foundation course on D&I, an essentials foundation course. I did it, and then we made it a policy to make every single person in the agency do it. So there's a time investment there. There's a small financial investment there. But the thing with D&I is that some people will feel really confident and well-versed and happy to talk about it and happy to approach it at work. Some people find it difficult. Some people find it alien. And I think a foundation course gets everyone on the same starting foot. It means that you've all got basic understanding of what territories you're talking about, some language that feels like appropriate or not. So if you can find some sort of foundational course and make it mandatory, that's the kind of thing where I think you're stepping up in terms of policy. It's not just a nice to do if you find time. You're asking your team to find time within the first 3 months of starting or by the end of Q2, for example. So that the IPA course is really good. And then also, I think if you can find something that feels a little bit like away from your main job, like I have got this relationship with Outvertising, it's exposing you to a sort of deeper and different experience. So it means that I've really got a much stronger knowledge around LGBTQ plus inclusion. And there are many versions of Outvertising for different groups. But I think that exposing yourself to something away from your day job opens up a new sort of sphere of learning for you as well. So I would encourage that if people have capacity. And then somebody said this really good phrase where they looked at their bookshelf and rather than self-reflection, they said, have some shelf reflection, which is you look at the authors, you look at the subjects you're reading and really like how wide a spectrum are you allowing yourself? And, you know, bookshelf is just an analogy for podcasts and what you're reading. And like you say, Instagram accounts you're following. Are you proactively looking to try and widen your sphere of things you're exposed to? And I think that's really healthy. I think that's such good advice to do that. And, you know, we for example, have a speaker series across the pond. We call it Pat Lunch. Everyone can eat their lunch and listen to a speaker that comes in. And often those people are just sharing their lived experience. It's not necessarily something that is about what we do. It's about advertising, marketing, content. No, it's just somebody saying what it's like to be transgender. It's somebody saying what it's like to live with HIV. It's somebody talking about the representation of Islam in the news, like just things that just like feed your brain with like exposure to wider cultures that perhaps your little day-to-day would naturally do. So that like proactive feeding of your mind, I think, is so important.
Yeah, I think that I really like the idea of like, you know, including that foundation into the onboarding of your team. And I think it really leads the way for culture as well, for building the culture that you want in your company, organization. And I mean, lived experience for me, that's like over the years running events, lived experience is what people want to hear, you know, and it's so much easier to absorb someone's lived experience than getting someone that's doing like a shiny, polished presentation talk. You know, you just want to hear what someone's experience is and then understand that, take it on board, and then you can kind of like move on from there.
Yeah, it's true.
I love that Pat Lunch kind of like.
It's like an infinite source. You know, you're never going to hear about every culture, every life experience. So it's infinite education.
Yeah. And I think it's also really good because it's not kind of like putting it on somebody, you know, you're asking someone just to come and share a bit about their life, which is huge. It's always, anyone that is willing to do a talk, I've always said, you know, it's such a big deal. Yeah. But them just kind of like coming up and giving a little bit about their lived experience is such a big thing. And I think it really resonates with the people that are listening because they appreciate that it's a big thing to do as well. And it's authentic. It's you know, it's a really great thing to do. So, and I also love like a little micro 20-30 minute podcast or something like that, because it's just enough for you to kind of like pay attention, you know, that someone's sharing something with you and that you pay attention. So I really like that.
What's been a nice effect of our Pat Lunch series is it was all about external speakers. You know, we'd find people to come in, but actually people internally have started to be motivated to share their stories. And some of them are really personal and really emotional. You know, one of my colleagues shared her experience of multiple miscarriages. One of our colleagues shared about her sort of journey to having a dual heritage, mixed identity, and how that felt growing up. One of our colleagues has talked about having ADHD. You know, these are things that we didn't necessarily set out to be part of our culture, but it's really beautiful that it's grown as part of our culture.
Yeah, and I think like things like that, it does make a change because these are things like your colleagues are going through, the
Yeah.
people that is like your work community are going through these things, and you may not know how to approach them, or you may not know what's going in the background. But once they've kind of shared that with you, then you have a slightly different perspective, and I think it's almost like kind of like a little bit of a kindness, like you can be more accommodating for those people. And also just it gives you more of a frame of reference, like you don't know what's going on with other people, and it just like makes you a little bit more empathetic to what's going on in other people's lives. Like,
The thing I dream is that people feel that they can bring their whole selves to work, and we really
yes,
mean that. And I think some people won't feel comfortable with that idea, and that's absolutely their choice. But
yeah, of
for
course,
people who want to bring their outside of work life in, you want to just create the best space for that, and it's so beneficial to the work you end up making together.
yeah. And I think the kind of things that people feel like they can't talk about, I've always found strange. Like years ago, I was at a networking event and I was talking to a lady, and she was saying that, oh, you won't be able to find me on LinkedIn because I've changed my name recently because I got divorced, but I've not really told anyone because I didn't want people to know because I don't want people to know what I'm getting divorced. And I felt like she had this whole like negative thing around it, and I was like, it's fine, I got divorced, just changed my name back, nobody bats an eyelid. Like, but
Yeah.
it's something that I thought was so small. I just changed my name on
Yes.
LinkedIn back.
Yeah,
But
she didn't feel comfortable enough to talk
yeah,
about that private side of her, and that means she's carrying something heavy and difficult at work.
yeah, yeah,
I've heard that expressed as like a barrier to just be in the moment and be good at your job
yeah,
because you've got this thing that you don't feel comfortable sharing, and it's difficult to handle. So you are probably not your best at work that day. So it has
yeah.
an absolute impact on the workplace.
Yeah, and I think it's such the stigma. That's what I was looking for the word. Is she was concerned about the stigma of people then messaging and saying, "Oh, wow, I saw, what's going on in your life." And
Mm.
yeah, I think the more we talk about these things and say, there's a lot of stuff around all sorts. Getting divorced is one thing, but then you have to do the admin, and then
Right.
yeah, the stigma attached to that. So yeah, I think there's a multitude of things that people could talk about, and I really like that kind of 20-30 minute lunchtime session. And it also means you get to know your colleagues, and sometimes there's that person that you didn't quite understand why you don't get on, and there's something going on with their life. All sorts can come out of those sessions.
That's so true.
Okay, and the next question we had was about Pride Month. So
Yeah.
also I would like to hear a little bit more about your work at Outvertising, because it's an organisation that I wasn't familiar with until I saw your bio.
Oh, cool.
So I know you've touched on that, but also thinking about Pride Month, which is one of the things I did mention to you, is that I have been aware of people that will just slam a rainbow logo on, will just put on an event, and it's people are doing it for the right reasons, well intentioned. But one thing that you said to me that really stuck with me was about why are you doing it? What's the policy? What's the change? You do that thing for that activity happens for a day, a month, a whatever.
Mhm.
So yeah, I'm interested to hear kind of your thoughts about like Pride Month, and what can organisations think about to do it better, to do it well, to do it so it has a meaning and value.
Yes. Yeah, the term for that, the danger there, I guess, is rainbow washing. So exactly,
Yes.
that's the idea of like painting a rainbow on something when actually your organization is not inclusive, it's not an ally. That's worst case scenario. And yeah, I agree. We should totally be working to avoid that. But I do think intention is really important. And like you say, intentions can be really good. And I want to harness good intention around activities rather than quash them. Like, I don't want people to fear the idea of doing activities because it might be read as tokenistic. For the most part, I think we assume people have really good intentions. And I love that, an employer might give everyone a rainbow cupcake during the month of June, or they might organise a social. Like, those things are generally really, really positive. I'm definitely pro fun pride activations. But what it is a chance for a business to reflect on, could they be more proactively inclusive for their queer community? Really like look at policy, or get in touch with somebody to help you look at policy, like Outvertising. So we have an employer resource, employer guidelines. This is free. You can get it from the Outvertising website. In our resources, and it gives you tips, like things you can do to just make sure you're being the best you can be to your queer employees, but also your wider network. So, for example, if you have maternity and paternity policies, perhaps you want to look at the language. Maybe you could call it parental leave. Don't assume that the partner of your pregnant employee is a man. I didn't carry our children, so I had parental leave that was the equivalent of a paternity leave. I did not want it to be called paternity leave because I'm not a father. And I think there are employers and workplaces that just haven't thought about those things. That would be really uncomfortable for me, for somebody to say you're on paternity leave. So we absolutely have the language parental leave, and that's quite an easy fix, but might have just not happened to anybody yet. But it would be so nice for the people team, the DEI team, the HR team to be thinking about these things before they need them. For me, that is real inclusive allyship. It's not waiting to have a transgender or non-binary employee and then thinking, is there for us to have a gender neutral bathroom? Let's think about that right now. Like, maybe some of our suppliers or visitors may be trans plus, and how welcome do they feel if there's no option that makes them feel completely comfortable in the bathroom? So there are things that you can be doing that don't necessarily cost money. They're looking at your language in your contracts. Do you have a name change policy? Like you say, somebody felt awkward potentially about the admin involved in having a name change because of divorce.
Yeah.
But there are extra layers to if you change your name because of your gender identity. Yeah. And these are things I've learned along the way. My God, I would never, profess to be an expert or perfect. But for example, if you had an employee who had a name when they arrived and their name changed during their tenure as an employee, there are things like when you tag somebody in a deck, it's likely that even though you've changed their name in their email, there's going to be a digital history. There's going to be a memory that you have their old name in it. And it's that type of vigilance that makes somebody feel good or can make somebody feel bad that day because you have used their old name accidentally. And it's happened to me. And I'm so glad that somebody told me that was happening, because that was totally unintentional. But if you talk about that kind of thing with your employees, or have something that goes out to people about how to try and be more inclusive to the trans plus community, you put the idea in people's heads and I bet they action it. Or, you encourage the use of pronouns and everyone has it on their signatures, but perhaps they forget to do it when they introduce themselves, or perhaps they forget to put it on their video chat. Like, here you can see my name and I also put my pronouns here because I know that if I'm in the presence of trans plus non-binary acquaintance, I hope that makes them feel that I've recognized the need for pronouns and the understanding of it. So there's so many actions you can do that I think we'd all be willing to do if we just had somebody suggest it to us. So as an employer, that's how you can lead.
I think it's also like it's also a fact that if I've had friends that have changed it, and if you get it wrong and you slip up sometime, it's not the end of the world. People, as long as you have the intentions well intentioned and you are aware. I think that's the other thing. I think people get scared, like, I'd rather not approach that at all because if I get it wrong, it'll be a disaster. It'll be awful. But I think it's just kind of making the move in the right direction. I think people appreciate that we all have, everything's changing. Like if anyone can find out how to change that digital history, I still get my old married surname come up. I have no idea how to change it.
No, but I think things hard. It can only happen through like conscious intention to make sure you're not doing it. If I meet somebody new and I don't know, I reference my other half, they'll always say, "Oh, does he do X?" or "What does your husband do?" And I'm not offended by the assumption. I'll say, "Oh, he, my wife," and that's absolutely part of just the learning of it. If they kept doing it over and over again, then I would probably start to feel that there was a lack of consideration. But it's just how we learn and work with our differences.
Yeah, I think that's also a point. Like I've also like encountered network situations, all kind of situation. People just rather avoid altogether than people make allowances as long as, like you say, continuously keep doing it. It's not done with malice.
Yeah, and I was speaking to a trans colleague of mine, and they were saying that they're really conscious of the idea of conditional allyship and non-conditional allyship. So you could be, let's say you're really conscious of the good use of pronouns, and you might introduce yourself with the pronouns, you might use your pronouns, but perhaps you're in a meeting where your trans colleague is misgendered accidentally by somebody. They're talking about them and they refer to them in the incorrect gender.
Yes.
And there's a moment where you go, oh, I don't want to interrupt their flow. I don't want to, this is a big meeting with 20 people listening, and I don't want to go, oh, actually they identify as XYZ.
Yeah.
But actually those things make your trans colleagues feel really good, that you're an unconditional ally, whether they're in the room or not. And so those are the things that hearing from my friend that helps, I'm going to be really conscious of now. So being exposed to those stories is going to make us better.
Yeah, I think that's true. So I've interrupted your train of thought there. Sorry. We were saying about Pride Month and activities. Is there anything else? So we've covered. One of the things that I just generally hate in life is tokenism.
Yeah.
But allyship, how to do that. Well, I feel like allyship is a learning thing. Like, as long as you kind of do it like you say with well intentions. I think it's about learning and finding those resources and just like being active in what you expose yourself to.
Yes, I think maybe this is an old-fashioned saying now, but the idea of allyship is a verb and not a noun. You don't just be an ally; you have to do it. And like, for example, I found out recently that some of my colleagues at Outvertising are heterosexual. I actually didn't know that, and I had assumed that everyone was probably part of the queer community. So there are heterosexual people giving really like big time and dedication to the cause of supporting the queer community in advertising, purely because they believe in the importance of it, and it's entirely not self-serving. That is a serious display of allyship to me. And so I think perhaps if you're C-suite or you're a director or you're senior and you worry that maybe you're a white, middle-aged, middle-class man and you don't feel that you have a place to get involved in this, I think your actions are so critical and so valuable that I hope that people don't feel scared to be involved, because actually I think you can really have a big impact if you fall onto those demographics and you're clearly a supporter to underrepresented people actively.
Yeah, for sure. I feel like I have quite mixed feelings about the term allyship, not for what it stands for, but being labelled like I would never refer to myself in that way.
Yeah.
I hope I would just be considerate of other people. And
yes, you're right. Yeah, it's one of those things that you hope isn't even needed as a term, because you hope most people are on the same page with it. But maybe it is really useful as a way for people to find a way to be involved.
Yeah, I think it's a good descriptive term in the sense of like how can I do what can I do, where can I learn, where can I learn about what to be more aware of and how I can be supportive, etc. I don't think I'd ever term myself. I'd ever put that label down.
I think there is research that shows that, unfortunately, diversity and inclusion efforts in businesses are often relying on a sort of volunteer spirit of people who are from marginalised groups. And an expectation that people from underrepresented groups are going to explain stuff or carry stuff or go the extra mile because they care more. And that's obviously really unhealthy. borderline dangerous territory to rely on as a workplace. So I'm hoping that the more we think about it and the more we talk about it, the more that's pointed out and the more it's problematic. So we have a little group called the Culture Council. They're kind of a volunteer body of people who are willing to be involved in decision making or willing to help out if somebody would like to just discuss something in this territory. I think it would have been easy for that group to be made up of people who are from underrepresented backgrounds. So we absolutely made it a priority to ensure that we had people from the top in terms of seniority to the bottom, that we had all genders represented, that we had a good, mix of queer people and racial identities, because that's the only way for a group like that to actually be useful.
Yeah, for sure. And that's the same thing that same conversation I have on a lot of these chats is about, if we don't allow everybody into the conversation, we will never see change. Okay, and then I just wanted to touch upon a little bit about yourself. What are the biggest challenges you faced in your professional career? Because we all like a bit of gritty anecdotal tale about someone's career.
I think maybe a really pivotal moment was when I decided to move away from TV production and move into what at the time was more content and is really just advertising and marketing. That came at a time when, honestly, the truth was I was struggling with the values of the industry that I was working in, even though I didn't particularly have that language to identify it as that. But I knew that I wasn't comfortable with some of the things I was doing, work I was making. I didn't love it. It felt like it just didn't feel true to me. And that's really hard because I'd done it for 7 years. I was building momentum. I felt ambitious. I was getting promoted. I was getting really good offers. I didn't struggle for opportunities, but there was definitely something in the back of my mind increasingly uncomfortable for me about the fact that I didn't actually like the industry. And I think I have colleagues who probably felt some of those things, but just dealt with it and carried on, and are even still in the industry now, because it's easy to do that, right? With work, you find what you know, you become good at something, you establish a reputation, and you plow through challenges and you carry on. For me, there was a real turning point where I decided that I didn't want to do it anymore, and it was going to be a risk to move. So I think that, I don't know if you'd call it bravery or something, but that moment where you take a risk to do something that feels better for you, I think is one of the most challenging points in any career, because you have to just take a big step into the unknown. So I would identify that as one of the times where I felt like it was, like a personal challenge that I had to be brave about. Then I think maybe it's worth just acknowledging the idea of imposter syndrome, which I'm sure lots of people can identify with, but perhaps also you read evidence that shows it's more of a female skewed problem. And that really is something I want to fight against. The idea that, apparently men more confidently will apply for jobs that don't necessarily list characteristics that they're genuinely experienced in, and women are more likely to identify, oh, that's not for me, I don't have that qualification. I think we have to fight imposter syndrome, which probably creeps into most of us. I'm conscious of that, and I think the older and more confident you are, the more you can tackle it, but that's definitely a professional challenge. And then the third thing I would say is just the constant day-to-day challenge of being both a sort of executor and implementer, and trying to be somewhat visionary and somewhat thought leader and bigger picture seeker than sometimes time allows you to be. So that's my ongoing professional challenge, and I feel like perhaps everyone has that, but it's good to talk about that you're doing, and you need to make space for thinking and planning. And so that is a tension that I think is a professional challenge.
Yeah, I think there's a lot to be said when you're kind of trying to do something, and you're the kind of go-to person. Like, I appreciate you taking this time out to have this conversation with me. And I think, it's one of those things where I always say, like, with all of this, like with the DEI, the conversations I'm having, I will get it wrong. I don't know. So I appreciate anybody taking time out to tell me things, signpost things, help expand my knowledge base. So
Oh my God, that's a critical thing to talk about as well. Just the acceptance that you absolutely cannot make everybody happy, and not everybody's going to agree with you. And when I was starting to lead on DEI, I had various sleepless nights where I would feel sick with the idea that even one person didn't feel that they loved what I was doing, or one person doubted an intention or didn't like something, because you really feel that it's really important. It's I don't know if it's more important than the bottom line, but equally important to the bottom line. And you really feel the pressure of making people feel good, comfortable, happy. And I would really worry about the idea of not everyone loving everything I was doing. But I am absolutely convinced that that's an impossible state to achieve. And so some acceptance around that is a good life lesson.
Yeah, for sure. You would never get anything done. Like I am very conscious. I'm conscious that I will get things wrong. I will use the wrong language, and I am very open to people saying, actually, that wasn't quite right. You didn't use the right language. That was wrong, and not stopping on that path of, okay, well, I'll take it on board. If someone didn't tell me, like someone doesn't tell you that you got it wrong, you can't make the change. So.
You never finish with D&I. It's an iterative state, because the world is in an iterative state, right? It's changing all the time. What's best practice? What's the right and wrong thing to do? And all we can do is just have the right intention to be doing it for the right reasons.
Yes, I think that's it. I think it's intention is right, and not doing activity for activity's sake is the big takeaway.
Yeah.
I think we covered this as well, but I just wanted to sum up with some of the signposts. So you've mentioned D&I leaders, the IPA.
Yeah, that was the foundational course.
Cool. Creative Equals.
Yeah, Creative Equals are a very cool organisation who lead in all things DEI, and specifically for advertising and marketing industry. So they were the people that helped us with that initial workshop that we did, that really kicked off how we focused on coming together to make our pillars. They helped us write what we call our manifesto, which is our sort of external declaration to why we do this and why we care about it. I think having something out in the world makes you inevitably more accountable to make it happen. So that's Creative Equals.
Amazing. Yeah, I think, to sum up, I think from what I've learned from speaking to you, it is about setting those pillars about what do you want to achieve, what are those kind of things, instead of saying, okay, we're going to do an activity for Pride, we're going to do an activity for Ramadan, we're going to do an activity for Lunar New Year. It's actually pick, okay, what is it as a business that we want to address or look at or be aware of?
Yeah.
And then work around that.
Activities will ladder into something. So you'll do your Pride activity, your Ramadan activity, because they're creating an inclusive culture, or they're helping you, target a really diverse marketing base externally. So they're all good, but it's absolutely the why.
Yeah, and it comes from, I think the starting point is your own organisation, your own business is looking at the culture of that business and then picking what those pillars are, as opposed to looking externally at what's happening that you can almost piggyback on. You want to look at what's happening in your own organisation and set those, because the people that are there will be part of the delivery of that. And I think one of the easy things, like you said, there's a lot of things you can do that don't cost money, but one thing that I think is important is looking at your suppliers and your network. A lot of the conversations that we have, like Consume talks about, is community, and looking at the community that surrounds your business, and if they align with your values, is definitely a part of something I would think that is important for diversity and inclusion, as are the people you're working with, their values align with that. That's a simple thing you can do straight away.
Totally, and how to increase how diverse they are, and how to make sure you're not just doing the classic sort of nepotistic, easy, who do we know and who's on in our world.
Yeah, and I think, and also just like sometimes you let things slide because you're like, oh, that supplier said something, like in my line, like a lot of stuff I've spoken about is for like the Easter community, and we talk about microaggressions that happen all the time, and you kind of let it slide because you're at work, etc. And like you say, it's the the unconditional kind of like being just not letting those things slide, make the difference, however small. Well, thank you so much, Anna. I've learned loads speaking to you. And I believe if anybody at the end of this has any questions, I will drop the links in for Outvertising. And are you happy for people to drop your line on LinkedIn?
I would love that. Yes, definitely. Always happy to talk about this with anyone. Yeah.
Yeah, and I will drop your LinkedIn as well. But yeah, I've really enjoyed our conversations. I have had much food for thought, which is the most important thing. We're on a constant learning scale. But yeah, I've really enjoyed this chat. So thank you so much.
Thank you.